Sometimes when you play Magic the Gathering, you'll find that everyone is enjoying themselves. If you want to put a stop to that, then you can always use a blue control deck. The answer to fun. In the Explorer format, blue commonly pairs with white for its powerful planeswalkers, uncounterable sweepers, and versatile removal. But today, instead of blue-white, we're playing blue-black, which has the advantage of... Regardless of your secondary color, the game plan of the blue control mage is to ruin the fun. Whatever your opponent wants to do, stop them from doing it. Kill all their creatures, counter all their spells, bring the game to a grinding halt, and do nothing proactive until they rage quit. In order to preemptively arm myself with excuses when I lose, I built a blue-black control deck with only 5 rares and 4 mythics. Though most of our victories come from concession, sometimes you might need 1 or 2 actual threats to hammer home the point. Our win condition is Torrential Gearhulk, a mythic creature with flash that lets us regurgitate any instant that we've already cast or discarded. Once it hits the battlefield, we can rummage through our graveyard for whatever the situation needs, whether it be extra card draw, a removal spell, or a counter spell. The combination of a free spell plus the chunky Gearhulk itself is often enough to swing the game in our favor. Casting this card may be the only proactive thing we do all game. Aside from the Gearhulk, the only other creatures in our deck are not actually creatures. Hall of Storm Giants is mostly just an island with too many words, but it moonlights as a 7/7 creature that's hard to kill. The rest of the deck is mostly counterspells, targeted removal, or board sweepers, which collectively can be categorized as spells that stop the enemy's stuff from existing. Rather than go through each card one by one, I will explain them more when they show up in-game. This opponent opens with the Llanowar Elves, a mana dork that accelerates them into a second-turn old-growth troll, which is a resilient 4/4 that gets to live twice. The troll tells us that they are playing mono-green aggro. I spend my first few turns doing nothing, a skill I've mastered over many years. When they attack, I finally decide to kill their troll with a Heartless Act, a near-universal creature removal spell. My life is just a resource, and every turn I must calculate how much damage I'm willing to take. Although the troll will respawn, that's a problem for later. But then they cast a different kind of troll. Since I have a mana open, I'll go ahead and use Rona's Vortex, attempting to bounce their creature, but they cancel out my spell by shrinking their troll to make it hexproof. Fine by me. Right now, all I'm trying to do is slow down my opponent and hit my land drops consistently, hoping that my Gearhulk will swing the battle in my favor. Every time my opponent makes a move, I have to decide whether or not to deal with the problem immediately, or sit back and wait for more value. When they cast a Scavenging Ooze, I opt to counter it with a Sinister Sabotage. Since our deck has graveyard synergies, we don't want their ooze to eat away at it, and on my turn I have to make a choice whether to sweep right away with Meathook Massacre or take a big hit and leave my mana open for a counterspell. Their old growth troll gets a second life. Though it may not be the best line, I opt to take the hit, which puts me to 7 life. On my following turn, I have no choice but to Meathook Massacre, wiping out their 2 smaller creatures and gaining me a bit of life. But now I'm tapped out. The cards I'm most worried about are the Great Henge, a spell that refills their hand, or Collected Company, a spell that refills the battlefield. Now is their chance to land either one. But then they cast a God Eternal Ronus, which would make their lone troll massive if I didn't have another Rona's Vortex in hand to bounce and thus kill the token. Having halted their aggression, I get to live another turn. We draw a critical 6th land, so our Gearhulk is finally online. On their turn, they attack with Ronus, and we flash in our Gearhulk. In our graveyard, we have no card draw spells, unfortunately, so I use the Gearhulk to flash back Heartless Act to kill the Ronus. For now, a consistent theme in their creatures is that they either come back from the dead or are hard to kill. Landing a Kazandu Mammoth, they keep up the pressure, but my 5/6 barrier helps me stabilize for now. The stalemate goes on, for which I'm thankful, I suppose. The longer the game goes, the better it gets for me. They start building up their board again, but we have another Meathook sweeping away our problems. Again, any turn where nothing happens is to my advantage. Their Ronus will keep coming back from the dead if I kill it on board. Meanwhile, their Lair of the Hydra can turn into a huge creature, so we have to leave up a blocker for it. When they attack with both the Lair and Ronus, we kill it with a Fatal Push, one of the best removal spells in the Explorer format. This may actually be one of the good reasons to play blue-black rather than blue-white. They draw into the same God Eternal Ronus as last time and cast it again, but we have another Gearhulk which flashes back Sinister Sabotage from the graveyard, countering the god and killing it for good. Our opponent has seen enough. Even though we've barely scratched them, they apparently don't like their odds, and we were just about to get a non-passive. The control versus aggro matchup basically boils down to defend and turtle until they run out of cards and quit. Since we play for the long game, we often fall behind early on board. Though sweepers like Shadow's Verdict, Meathook Massacre, Ritual of Soot, or Supreme Verdict kill everyone's creatures, including our own, the key to making such cards worth it is to not have any creatures to begin with. In Explorer, one deck that we often run into is Green-White Angels, against which we have a strong matchup. In this game against Angels, the early game goes as expected, with them landing a bunch of creatures, gaining life, and growing their creatures. But we have our board sweepers ready. We clip their wings with Meathook Massacre. 2 Meathooks, actually. While we are close to tapped out, they cast Collected Company, which summons 2 Angels at instant speed. Coco is really the only card of theirs that we have to worry about, and before it resolves, we use our last remaining mana to cast Heartless Act on their Bishop of Wings. Thankfully, they don't find any juicy targets. In this game, our opponent is surprisingly resilient. They decide to rage quit. I can't blame them. There's nothing more frustrating than losing to a control mage who just sits there doing nothing at all, dragging out the game, wasting everyone's time, draining away the hours of this finite mortal existence. While we have a strong matchup against Angels, not all aggro decks are made the same. One color in particular tends to give blue control decks a non-zero amount of trouble. With instant speed spells like Lightning Strike and oppressive threats including but not limited to Robber of the Rich, Kumano, and the occasional Hazaret, red decks can rush down control players before they can mount to defense. When you play best of ones, there's often the feeling that you're just playing rock, paper, scissors. Just as an example, blue control decks have a strong matchup against Angels, which in turn is strong against red aggro, which in turn can rush down the blue control player. While best of threes allow us to even out the matchup, a majority of players on MTG Arena play best of ones. But if we want to expand upon the rock, paper, scissors theme, then, and I'm speaking very broadly, mid-range beats aggro, which is strong against tempo, which beats control, which beats combo, which is strong, decent-ish against mid-range, but despite any real or perceived imbalance in the matchup, the outcome is far from predetermined. In our final game of the day, we run into a player who on their first turn drops a snow-covered island, telling us that they're likely playing mono-blue tempo. On paper, this is not a good matchup for our blue-black control deck. On my end step, they flash in a Spectral Sailor, confirming our hypothesis, and we immediately kill it with a Fatal Push. Unlike most creature-based decks, blue tempo can fight against our removal using counterspells, giving us a taste of our own medicine. The following turn cycle is a repeat of the last one. Another Spectral Sailor, another Fatal Push. When they drop a Supreme Phantom, I respond by casting a card draw spell, but they decide to counter it with Lofty Denial. I'm okay with this because now they're tapped out. On my turn, I can do what I want without worry of my stuff being countered. With Bloodchief's Thirst, we kill their Supreme Phantom. It's a slow game with no creatures on board, just as I like it. They have more cards in hand than I do, which is somewhat worrisome, but I do have a man land. Animating my Hall of Storm Giants, I swing at them with the 7/7 creature. They cast another Supreme Phantom, which I attempt to push, but once again they counter my removal. On my turn, I go in for the kill. Using my last card, Rona's Vortex, I attempt to clear the way for my Hall of Storm Giants. If they have yet another counterspell or something like a Rattle Chains, then they get to live another turn, but apparently they don't. We were quite fortunate to have drawn a removal-heavy hand. If a blue tempo deck builds up a strong board, then they often have the means to defend their army. For a new player, control is perhaps the most difficult archetype to master, especially in a format as unforgiving as Explorer. The victories will be hard-earned and the losses will feel unfair. As a final note, in our deck we run a single copy of Commit Memory, our 5th and final rare. This card is not essential, but it's nice to have. Commit is an expensive but universal counterspell or bounce spell, while its other half, Memory, is castable only from the graveyard, and it refills both players' hands. But if you have a Narset, Parter of Veils in play, then your opponent only gets to draw 1 card off of Memory, while you get to draw 7. Even so, Memory is a situational spell requiring you to tap out unless you have a Torrential Gearhulk. Use with caution.